So, assignments, hopefully these are not going to be difficult. I don't foresee anyone having any problems. One of the things that was really good about this module, when I look at the numbers of people taking it, one, it's small, and two, I know all of you people, and I've got no doubt. That's why I'm saying, like, the average mark should be above 70. You know, I know what you guys are capable of. Very important to begin, first principles, digital gaming. That is what we are interested in. We are not interested in board games. They are a thing, right? Mm-hmm. They're a board game. What the hell is going on?
My dad's addicted with like
to what?
To board games, and he goes to like little meetings and they all do it and they dress the theme and it's so sad.
It's freaking me out. I won't lie to you, the whole thing is freaking me out. What is going on? Is this like people playing Monopoly?
No.
Like, what are they playing at?
Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, not D&D.
That's not even a board game though, is it?
It's more of an RPG.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, is that a big thing, Dungeons and Dragons?
My sister's husband plays it with his friends, like every Monday night.
When grown men play Dungeons and Dragons together, right, I guarantee they're not. I don't know what they're doing. I look at this circle jerking or something, but they are not playing Dungeons and Dragons, all right? So, we are interested in digital games. Digital games encompass both video games and computer games. Very important to note, they are not the same thing. A video game and a computer game are not the same thing as one another. Okay? They mean different things. At the very base level, a computer game is played on a computer. And a video game is played on a console, usually. Computers and consoles are not the same thing. Computer is multifunctional, a console is not. Console is single purpose. Oh, okay, somebody can put my Blu-ray disc, fuck off. Alright, they are singular, okay? So, digital gaming we're talking about. Mobile games, console games, computer games. Okay, video games, I would put mobile games in. Video games, not computer games. Other games played by digital mediums. In that, I'm allowing us to encompass things like VR games on a VR headset or something like that, which would be a video game. So, be ultra careful right at the beginning how you define what you're doing and what you're playing. You could be playing a computer game, you could be playing a video game. Get used to the distinction between the two, because I will pick it up. You know, if you use the wrong term, I'll be like, but you're not doing that. The reason why it's important is the affordances of those two mediums are very different. Now, this is a McLuhanist sort of approach to the history of video games, and that's a very important point to start. If you use a computer to play games, a computer is a different medium. Therefore, it presents the game differently, it prevents the optionality of the game differently. New Vegas is a very different game on a PC compared to an old 360, or if you upgrade it to a PS4 or something like that, which you can play it on that. I don't think I can play it on PS5 yet.
You can, I think I don't know.
I don't even think it's on PSN network, which is a shame. I wouldn't mind giving it a go, but anyway, to make my point, the experience is completely different. It's the same, it's the same game, but it's not the same game. It is never actually phenomenally the same game, because the interface is different, the affordances of what we can do. You say you can mod the game in different ways, therefore the experience of the game changes because of that. This is incredibly important. It's, to give good examples, what do you use to play Rocket League?
Just Xbox controller.
On what?
Xbox One.
Okay. My experience of Rocket League on PS5 is not the same as your experience of Rocket League on Xbox One. Just to make that, cross-platform games actually draw this point out really, really well, I think. We can play games on different platforms. My experience of playing Red Dead Redemption 2, this is the first time I've ever played it on a PS5. You might think, it's the same game. Well, I'm using a different controller. Yeah, I'm using a different interface to actually control it. At first, I couldn't ride properly, and I said, why is it? the last time I did it, the feeling in my hands was completely different to playing the game. You might think, well, are they that different? Yeah, they really are. PS5 controller is very different to a PS4 controller. It's heavier, it's different shape, it's a different size. The sticks are slightly in different positions. And I've got that muscle memory from playing hundreds of hours of it previously, and all of a sudden it's like, I genuinely, for the first 10 minutes, like, this does not feel right. This feels so clunky. This feels so bad. And it took me a little while, but I was into it then. These distinctions are important to us. How we play and what we play on is something that we need to consider. But we also need to draw distinctions here between what are games that we're interested in and what aren't. It would be really easy for me to make a module about like just games. But I'm not interested in board games. Board games blow. You know, I don't get why people, grown adults, sit in cafes playing board games. Go get drunk. You know, go do something.
What's funny is there's a place in Wine Street which is literally
next
a
to
board game cafe next to like
it's next to the Railman's Club, isn't it? Which is, you know, you've got a really good distinction. Board game cafe, stinking pit. You know, that's a really interesting one. What we always need to think of, first principles. What does the medium in the message mean? Go back, right the way back to MS100. We have a medium. What is the message of that? In terms of gaming, that is always going to be controllers, capabilities, interfaces, and most importantly, the cultures which emerge from them. Now, the affordances of PC gaming allow for cultures of PC gaming to emerge. You can interface with different services at the same time, right? So you obviously interface with Twitch, for example.
yeah.
But it's not just Twitch as well. You could be Discording at the same time.
Of course, yeah, you could do loads of things.
Of course you can, yeah. This is the affordances of using a PC. Whereas with a console, we are more limited in doing this. They still haven't integrated Discord with PS5. Still, even though it was supposed to be done in like month 1, I believe. So, from a McLuhanist perspective, the cultures that emerge from what you use to play will be very different. If you only play on a mobile device, believe me, your culture of gaming is very different because you are going to be very limited. Eve's huge homescape sessions are her own. Because nobody's interfacing with that shit. Okay? But it's much more solitary. And indeed, gaming culture, you know, up until the early 2000s was a solitary gaming culture. There wasn't the opportunities to interface with other people. Or, you know, what did I do when I was a kid? We used to go to school the next morning and talk about what we played. And it was like, yeah, I played this game, it was amazing. And it was like, how much does it cost? 30 quid. Oh, I'm not buying that. Lend it me. And then you'd give somebody the cartridge and you'd never see it back until you went out to their house and beat them. This was gaming in the 90s. All of these things contribute to our understanding of, our experience of, and how we game. And it is important to think right from the outset in terms of these principles. Now, the culture of PC gaming is toxic.
Very.
The culture of console gaming is toxic with a dollop of toxic on top, put in a toxic box, and buried in a toxic pit. It's even worse. So, as Jessica has already shown, right? Because Xbox Live is not good. It really isn't good. Okay, where do we begin? Computers are where we start with digital gaming. But it is important to note that the word digital does not really exist until the 1970s. Computers in the 40s had no digital parts. The microchip was not invented at this point in time, so they used tubes. I know this is messed up, right? But you can think about it. Literally, cathode ray tubes were used where you would fire electrons from one point of a glass tube to the other to carry information and visuals. It's like how I mean, this is going to be, I don't know, you guys probably, you may never have seen one. Has anyone ever seen what's called a CRT television?
Yeah.
They've become really expensive now because one, there's not many of them, and two, if you want to play, you know, retro games and so on, you say, you know, in the email to me, you know, does the Sega Mega Drive even exist? And I was like, yeah, it does, but you can't play it on like a flat screen. It doesn't work. You need an old television to do it. Interestingly, back in the day, we used to have things like guns to play. You probably, some of you have seen a video of somebody playing Duck Hunt with a Nintendo gun. You can't use that. They don't work anymore. They simply will never work on a television today. There's no way you can even adapt them to work. Which is kind of sad times, because I used to enjoy shooting ducks. You know, this was a whole thing, and I was into it. The Mega Drive had a bazooka, which was messed up. The principle of those was based on cathode ray technology, because they've never been able to find a way to map this on. It's like, if you look at the history of Move controllers for consoles, I mean, Nintendo obviously did an amazing job with the Wii controllers. Sony have not done a great job ever with theirs, with those stupid wands that they've got, and the Kinect, Microsoft's Kinect was also pretty terrible as well. The problem being here, mapping movement of that way using a camera on top of the screen is really, really difficult. Nintendo got it really spot on because their controllers were really, really simple. They weren't trying to do very much with them. But old school games, old school technology. Transistors start replacing vacuum tubes in 1951, and when that happens, when you move to transistors rather than vacuum tubes for displays and so on, you start to see the first games. The first video game really ever made is Checkers in 1951. So, games, how long have they been around for? Roughly speaking, 71 years. I mean, there can be some variation in that, but 71 years is a good starting point. There were some things around before that you possibly could say, but digital games and video games, probably Checkers, 1951, that's probably the first one. You all know what Checkers is, right? It's like that crappy chess thing, where like you pick pieces up, and it's like chess for morons, yeah? Drafts, it's what it's called. Anyone know what TTT is? No.
Tic-tac-toe.
Very good. Tic-tac-toe. Noughts and crosses, if you want to translate it into UK, 1952. As you can see, not exactly Red Dead Redemption 2. Checkers, tic-tac-toe. What are these things got in common? Simple. The interface of them is very simple. What you need graphically is incredibly simple, and the rules are very, very defined. That means these games are small, they don't take up much logic, and they don't take up much storage. Storage back in those days, I mean, that would have filled a computer, tic-tac-toe. And a computer was a room back then, running on tape. So, you know, complexity, it wasn't really a thing. The first discernible game that we probably would recognise as a digital game today is Space War, developed in 1961 by Steve Russell at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Students wanted to test the capabilities of their new DEC PDP-1 machine, which was at the time the most advanced computer ever made. And then this game was widely distributed by DEC on the back of it. I mean, this is it. I mean, you can play, I've put a link, I think, on you can play Space War in a browser. Go and go. It's terrible. I mean, it is dreadful. You might play for 5 minutes and then think, oh my god, this is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Distribution, I say widely distributed. That needs to be understood in context.
Yeah.
Nobody owned any computers in the 1960s. No household had a computer. The only way, who did, do you think? Where computers have appeared in the 1960s.
They'd appear in labs, not in homes.
Definitely not in homes. In labs, yeah. Being really specific, university labs. They were pretty much the only customer for these early machines would have been universities. What you get, therefore, is two things with this distribution of early games. One, they're only in particular places of knowledge and power, which meant that the people who were playing them were particularly privileged. They had to be people, not just in universities, but in particular departments in universities. Physics labs, chemistry labs, mathematics labs, the early computer science labs. Could anyone have a guess about what these people looked like?
Your typical, lab coat, glasses.
I don't necessarily mean in terms of dress.
Oh, right.
Let's think in more demographic terms.
Oh.
White, rich, and
White, rich men.
Oh.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. The only people who played these games back in the day were white, rich, privileged men at top institutions in the United States studying STEM subjects. That was it. There was no exposure otherwise. That creates a cultural aspect to the development of early video games. Those are the people who played them, those are the people who had access to them, those are the people who started developing them. Early on, the development parameters of video games are set by who got exposed to them. And the people who started developing games in a wider scope after Space War would be white, rich, well, best to say from privileged backgrounds, male, scientists. That's really important. Culture of science is not the same as the culture of other subjects. Culture of science is completely different to what we do. So, there is a very different worldview, there is a very different way of looking at things. So, in 1971, you see the first rip-off of a video game. So, Stanford University, other coast of America from MIT, just outside San Francisco. Galaxy Game appears. They didn't even bother to change the name that much. Space War becomes Galaxy Game. Basically, a bunch of kids in Stanford found a way of ripping off the code, put it in a cabinet, shoved the cabinet in the student union of Stanford University, charged everyone 10 cents a go, and had to go in every day to empty the machine because there were so many 10-cent pieces in it. They started clogging up after every day. They made an absolute fortune out of this one cabinet and started making other cabinets as well to distribute into certain places. Note where it was? Stanford University. This is one of the top 5 universities in the United States, Stanford. So, it's still a very privileged environment. We see two very important developments here. One, copying. The history of video games is littered with theft. It's very hard to actually claim ownership of these things. Nobody had copyright for Space War. Right? They didn't even think about, we've got to copyright this game. We're just going to, So it got nicked. And 2, monetization. All of a sudden, this really interesting thing that you could do on computers, and it's like, we do it slightly differently. Now the transistors have improved and we can shrink it down into a box that we can put somewhere. We can make some money out of this. And make money they did. The 70s is the emergence of video games as a business, but not in a business that we would understand it today. So again, you change the form, go back to McClure, when you change the medium, you change the possibilities of what is capable with it, and you change the culture around it. All of a sudden we see new forms of media developing to take games further. So, the first in-house systems develop in the late part of the 1960s. Ralph Baer was very important in this. His marvellous innovations which changed gaming forever, and believe me, that's not a lie, this is true. Chase game, guess what you have to do? Oh yeah. Excitement. Literally 2 dots on the screen, pretty much. Light guns, shooting paddles, tennis, messed around with interfaces in a big way. So for the home market, started thinking, what do people want to do at home? And invented loads of different controllers. Prototypes were played multiple games, so he innovated with actual delivery. Instead of having one game to play on one system, he was the first person to put multiple games onto a system, so you had different experiences. Didn't bother with sound, didn't bother with titles, didn't bother with anything. You literally just selected, chase or tennis or something like that. 3-dial interface. So this original machine, the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home console, was controlled with a controller, and you can look this up, there's loads of images, go Google Images and have a look. There were dials on it. No buttons. You had a dial to spin one way, spin the other way, spin the other way. Vertical, horizontal, and spin. That's how you controlled movement. I've held one of these things and I cannot get my head around how anyone moved anything on it. It's absolutely crazy. These are the first systems to bring video games to TV screens in the USA. By 1967, television had become ubiquitous in the United States. I think all of you probably did media history. I think none of you paid attention. So let me take you back to television and media history. Television doesn't really become a medium in the home until the 1950s and 1960s. By 1967 in the USA, every home pretty much in America had a television. Some had 2. Not that many at that point in time. This is the first system to actually tap into the thing that we all had. So, intersection between television and video games historically has been critically important. Video games in the home exist in the 60s. They exist in the 70s as well. They don't blow up really until the 1980s. Does anyone know why? On the basis of what I've just said, why did it take until the 80s for video games at home to go crazy?
I mean, I'm guessing these devices were extremely expensive at the time, right? So,
Well, actually not that expensive, but more, yeah, they weren't cheap, to be fair. But it's not really, that's not really the reason why.
Is it because TVs weren't designed to actually have them running on them?
TVs were fine. What happened, and I know this because this is how Sega systems worked in the 80s and 90s. You plugged the back in, and then you literally tuned the television into the signal. So that all televisions would work. Now, the big thing is this. Until the late 70s and early 80s, the idea of having 2 televisions in a house was unheard of. It took until then for television prices to come down and economic conditions to improve that much that people thought, oh, we can have a television in a different room. And now you're looking at me like, what? How many TVs do you have at home?
like 3.
Does anyone have just one? Really?
Mm-hmm.
What are you living in a fucking cave or something? Well, I know Tom Pendra's not that advanced, but holy shit, surely you can have a TV. Why?
Just one in the living room.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I guess in this day and age, TVs are not as important because, let's be fair, we carry one around with us everywhere we go anyway. But it took until 70s, 80s to have extra screens. You imagine in the 60s, you're all sitting down to watch television after dinner, and then some spotty little nerd kid comes along and says, fuck off, I want to play my Magnavox Odyssey, and the rest of the family are like, the fuck out. You needed the extra, you needed to send that little spotty nerd somewhere else to play it, right? So it took some time for this to come around. But the tech has been around for a long time. Again, this is 55 years ago that home systems were available. I'm not making a claim that, you get ray tracing on one of these, but it's been around a long time. Point I'm trying to make with all of this stuff, this history stuff, is each stage, evolution. Gaming industry starts small but gets bigger, and it's an evolutionary process. And the point you need to understand is we're still in evolutionary process. it's not finished. It ain't done yet. Into the arcades. Al Alcorn, very important man, Atari's first game engineer. In 1972, implemented Pong. Again, I have put Pong up for you to play. It is a classic. Just like that narratology thing, people would invent backstories for the flipper. And like that there was somebody you were playing against who was a real piece of shit. This was fairly normal. Machines often malfunctioned because they got so full of coins that, Pong made insane money. People would stand for hours pumping quarters into Pong machines in the 70s. They unfortunately forgot to copyright the game, which meant that people also ripped it off incredibly, and it made huge amounts of money for other people as well. Pong was an example of what would be money making for a long time. Simple, repetitive, but immersive. And that is a very important word. The games that worked and the games that made a lot of money were games which people felt immersed in. It's a really simple game, but you were in it. You got addicted to it. The factor of immersion here separates out games that worked and games that didn't work. You start to see variations in the arcades after Pong. So Tank, the first kind of, war game, battle game. Pursuit games, driving and racing. The first sit-down cabinets are changing the actual physical orientation of the gamer. Instead of standing in an arcade machine, you sit, you have a wheel. You actually had a rudimentary gear stick, although I don't think it actually did anything. You could move it, but I don't think it was linked to the game in any way, so you would just, I don't know what you were doing. You start to see variations and the emergence of puzzle games break out. Death Race, you start to see the first controversies emerge with the violence of video games, with Death Race, for example, where guess what you have to do? Kill people in a race. So, it was a lot of fun. We start to see themes around gaming emerge. We start to see genres, first of all, and within those genres you start to see controversies emerge in the 1970s. You start at the end of the 70s to see cultural phenomena. So this is probably one of the most famous screens in the history of video games. This is the beginning, that's level 2 of the original Space Invaders. 1978 Space Invaders, the concept of the high score, first of all, becomes a commodity. Nobody had ever had high scores before. So you're able to compare yourself to other people. Gaming becomes competitive. It's a term you used, Dan. It's been around a while. We had Space Invaders in the chip shop in Ammanford. Right? Now this is how backward Ammanford was a place when I was growing up. We had it there until about 1990. It came out in 1978. But people would go in and still play Space Invaders and try and take down the main score. The main score could have been there for God knows how long. Memory. Arcade games start fitted with primitive ROM chips to remember scores. So you had a longevity to playing that game. And I don't know what it was about South Wales, but chippies always had games machines in them, which meant it was really hard to play because people would eat chips and play the game. So the fucking joystick was covered in grease. It's like when you pick someone else's controller up and then ming it. Yeah, can you imagine hundreds, thousands of people having played? There's bits of chip and stuff in the buttons, and it's a whole thing. I'm not into it anymore. you start to see Space Invaders has high scores. Starfire was the first to use initials. When you start using 3 initials, what's the next development culturally in video games? It's not just saving your name. What do people do? What is the most popular set of initials in the first few years of playing a video game? A. No. B. U. N. Of course it is. Followed by C. O. C. Followed by F. U. K. If you ever see one of these machines that's still running, I guarantee those initials are all over the place, okay? Yeah, gaming starts to grow up. Or maybe it starts to go the other way. I'm not sure how you actually interpret that. At this point, because Space Invaders is so huge, and it's an absolute cultural phenomenon, the Bank of Japan had to commission more 100 yen coins when it launched, because literally the country ran out. There weren't any. So they had to go to the mint in Japan and say, you've got to make more of these fucking things. We are out of money here, because they all put them in these machines. You start to see the emergence of other companies. Other companies form alliances with other companies to make gaming companies. So in the late 70s, Konami come around, Namco come around. I was thinking those are probably the 2 biggest who are still exist today and are still major players within the gaming industry. Because they see that this is a license to print money. People are playing this all the time. If you want to know more about Space Invaders, does anyone know who Kingsley Amis is? Have you heard the name? See, Swansea University is such a dump. Kingsley Amis was a professor at this university. He was one of the most respected authors in the English language in the 20th century. He lived in Uplands. There's a blue plaque on the house that he lived in. It's by Clondonkin Park. His son, Martin Amis, is also an author. In the early 80s, Martin Amis wrote a book about playing Space Invaders, where he detailed his life as a young man living in London at the time, where, I don't know how much you all know about London, but like he used to go to Soho in the evenings, right? And you usually think young man who goes to Soho in the evenings back then, he's either doing one of 2 things, either like buying drugs or having illicit gay sex. That was it. That was all Soho was for. No, he went to arcades that would open late after hours so he could play Space Invaders. And there was a huge subculture of people who would go to these illicit late night arcades, which weren't open to the public. You had to like go in the back and knock on the door and so on, and then you could go in and play Space Invaders all night. And he wrote a whole book about it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's just like, holy shit, this is amazing. This actually happened. This is brilliant. Back in the arcades, 1980, Namco originally released a game, or built a game, that was called Pac-Man. Anyone know why they changed the name from Pac-Man to Pac-Man? Let me give you a simple illustration of why. Can you imagine an arcade console board, you know, up and thing, and on the side of it is Pac-Man? Oh. Very easy to take the P and make it into an F. So, they changed Pac-Man to Pac-Man and really created the first video game character. Pac-Man, that little cheese thing, right? The waka 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 is the actual sound. Again, you should play Pac-Man this week. This is very important for your education. It's an incredible game. I am amazing at Pac-Man. I will take anyone on, but I almost guarantee that you will all be universally shit at it. And it's not because you are terrible people or anything. Because the disciplines of playing games like this are so different to anything now. The concentration and reflexes needed to be good at this stuff. We don't have games that ask that anymore. The games that we play now just don't work this way. And I know I've got people who play this before, and it's like they're terrible at it. I get why. This doesn't exist in any anymore. That's why I wanted an arcade machine to put in there, like just to laugh at people. and then come along and beat the crap out of you with my greasy chip hands. That would be the whole thing. First identifiable video character. In 81, MIT students hacked the game enhancement kits for Pac-Man and ended up producing Ms. Pac-Man. She has a bow. I mean, that's the big difference. Yeah. It's the first real identifiable female video game character, for one, but two, the first also stereotyping of women in video games. How do we make a female character? Well, women wear bows and ribbons, as we can see. Look at you all with your bows and ribbons. Yeah. Pac-Man incredibly important because of the idea of character. See platform games start to emerge after that, and then further characterization. So Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. introduced Mario, who very shortly after this is going to become the biggest video game character of all time, and probably, I think, is still arguably the most identifiable and biggest video game character of all time now. Things are going on in the home. In 1972, you see the first handheld video game come out, a handheld version of Tic-Tac-Toe. 76, you see the emergence of game cartridges, the possibility of playing multiple games on the same piece of hardware. 77, the first joystick for the home is invented. You start to see, I mean, I'm really stretching credibility here, but vector graphics. These are not 3D graphics, but Asteroids and the Atari 2600 allows for a platform where you can use vectors. Laserdisc could have been huge. Laserdisc was a way of storing vast amounts of information on a single disc. There was only two drawbacks with them. You guys have never seen a Laserdisc, right? No?
Heard of it.
You've heard of it, but I don't know how you would see one now. They're collector's items. They're really expensive. But you've all seen like a vinyl LP. Yeah, you know what I mean with a 12-inch vinyl. It's a big piece of plastic, right? A Laserdisc was a big piece of plastic too. Imagine a CD which was 12 inches, and in like 83 would have cost about £70, which factoring up 40 years, probably that's the best part, 500 quid today, for one game. Hell of a frisbee, I would say that. 1982, I picked this out on purpose. You see the birth of Electronic Arts, the most demonic of all games companies. Not only do they make really addictive games like Sims, they make really morally bankrupt games like the FIFA franchise, where you get people to buy the same fucking game over and over again, and then spend more money in it to have a good team. PCs start to emerge as gaming consoles, as gaming machines about 81, 82. And interestingly, in terms of culture, PCs are supported by magazines. This was very laborious, but you could buy a PC magazine. They had source code for games in it. You would have to go to the operating screen and type in the source code yourself. There was no, you couldn't scan it or anything like that. But eventually they would start using cassette tapes for this purpose, which took a while. But those magazines could then distribute games. You just had to sit and copy the source code yourself. On that note, Commodore 64, a gaming computer purely towards gaming, emerges in 83, right? With that, the first networked commercial text mode game, Snipes, comes out. The first internet-based game is 1983. Runs on bulletin boards, which were text-based communities of messages online. Again, online needs to be contextualized back then. Online meant a bunch of geeks sitting in a lab somewhere talking to each other. You had to be in a university, you had to be something. You could, at this point, use a home computer to access the internet, but it was very, very expensive and involved a lot of technical know-how. The first handheld LCD console comes out 84. So, in parallel with the arcades, you see home developments as well, until 83, when the entire console market imploded. I think I've put E.T. on canvas. It's unfair to say it's the worst game of all time, but it's in the top 1 or 2. And the effect of E.T. So E.T. the film comes out in what? 83. And it's huge. I've never been able to watch it all. I find E.T. really freaky. With his little hand and... No, and it's like that. And then, no, I prefer Alien to E.T. Right? It's less freaky. That phallic alien thing, that E.T. just really freaks me out. So, to cash in on what was at the time the biggest film of all time, the highest grossing film in history when it was released in 1983, Atari commissioned some developers to make an E.T. game for Christmas. They basically had 6 weeks to make something, to get it out in time for people to buy it for Christmas. Because in order for that to happen, it's got to come out, end of October. E.T. comes out in the summer. Atari makes the decision to commission the game and then gives the commission company 6 weeks to make something in order to cash in. And unsurprisingly, it is the worst video game of all time. It is dreadful. It is absolutely terrible. I've tried to play it lots of times. I can't get past the first couple of screens because I simply go into some hole somewhere and I can't even work out how to get out of it. And that was pretty much everyone's experience. That game was expensive. That game was like 35 quid in 83. Again, you factor that up for inflation, that's well over £100 for a game which is the worst game of all time. It was so badly received that 2 things happened. One, it bankrupted the Atari company, the biggest games company in the world, who had invested loads of money in producing this game in terms of the physical production of cartridges, which they then couldn't sell because it was so badly received. So they went bankrupt. And as an interesting byproduct, they had to do something with all the unsold games. So they went out into a desert in New Mexico, dug a hole and buried them all. Years later, people went looking for them and found all these buried video game cartridges. It's amazing. And people have written books about it. And I recommend in the handbook a series called High Score on Netflix. And I think the first episode deals with this. And indeed has an interview with the guy who made it, right? Which is really bad, because he seems like a really nice guy. He's like, oh my, that game sucks, dude. That's really bad. So what I wanted to do today, and we're completely out of time, right, is I wanted to go through these console generations and get you to think about what happens at each generation, because evolution of games is really important. First generation, we have these machines. What do you think is the most important thing of that first generation? First generation of machines into the home, what is important about it? I've kind of given you the answer.
Affordability. Like being able to afford it.
Something affordable and something, literally, taking video games and making them domestic. That's the key thing. You domesticate the technology, first of all. You provide the idea that you can play games at home. You don't have to go to Johnna's Chippy in Ammanford and try and wipe it down with a piece of paper towel. Second generation makes affordable. First generation is expensive, it's difficult to have. Second generation, you see improvements in graphics, but affordability, in particular with the 2600, which became the biggest selling console in the world, but only until the next generation. Third gen, NES, Master System, Commodore 64, the major breakthroughs in home gaming. What did they do differently, you think?
I think marketing was a massive thing, especially with Nintendo as well.
Absolutely. Key cultural difference, the machines made are Japanese. Nintendo and Sega, Japanese companies, come into the market. They spend lots on marketing. They change the perception of what the gaming machine is. What does NES stand for?
Nintendo Entertainment System.
And the key word being entertainment. This is not a game system, this is an entertainment system. It is repositioning gaming as a form of entertainment rather than a niche activity that just kids would do in the home. So the third gen expands the principle of playing video games at home to other people. It expands who it is for. The fourth generation is all about technology. If the third generation laid the groundwork for playing games at home, the fourth generation takes that groundwork and actually makes it better. So 16-bit machines like the Super Nintendo and the Sega Mega Drive, they recreate arcade experiences at home. One of the problems with the 8-bit generation here is that the games are not technologically advanced. And if you went to arcade, you had a much better experience of gaming than you did in the home. Fourth gen closes that gap. And you see another key innovation. You start to see the move away from cartridges, which are expensive to produce and have very low memory, to optical media. At this generation, you start to see the emergence of CD-based media, which is basically got more storage space. Eventually, we will go on to DVD-based media with Generation 6, and now we're on Blu-ray-based media with the current generation. And in fact, optical media dies in this generation of consoles anyway. We're never going back to discs. It's all going to be digital from this point onwards. So, I'm going to skip through there. You'll be really pleased to know that my organisation of time is still shit. These console generations, 5th gen, important thing that happens at this generation is that the home system now supersedes the arcade. Basically, this generation of machines kills off arcade gaming forever. That really important driver of innovation early on dies because the home machine is now better. Nobody goes to the arcade from this point onwards because you don't need to. What you have at home is way better than playing a game in an arcade. 6th gen, PlayStation 2 is the biggest selling console of all time. For now, that could change in the next week or so. I think the Switch is just about to overtake it. What did that generation of machine do? There are two really important things that happen at this generation which changed home gaming forever. Any ideas? I know this is hard for you guys because
Is
you
one
were born.
multiplayer? Is one multiplayer?
Yes. First of all, beginning with the Dreamcast, you have genuine multiplayer online gaming. Dreamcast is the first machine to have an inbuilt modem. Wasn't great. 56k modem. It's not like playing, over over broadband or anything like that. But it at least facilitated the beginning of online communities for games and the beginning of online play against one another. And these are, PlayStation 2, you had to buy an extra unit to play because Sony didn't think. Weirdly, Sony made a misstep and you had to buy a peripheral for it, but it did work in the end. There's one other thing as well.
Move to 3D.
Comes at 5th gen. 5th gen is really important in terms of 3D gaming. Not very good. If you go back and play something like Siphon Filter or Metal Gear Solid on PlayStation 1 now, it'll make you sick, to be honest. It's not great, but 3D came before. 6th gen, PlayStation 2 in particular, do you know why it was more popular than all the others? There's a really simple reason. It's got nothing to do with gaming.
They had a DVD player.
It did. And Sony marketed it as a DVD player. So you didn't need to buy separate machines anymore. You didn't need a DVD player and a games console. And literally, at this generation, Sega dies as a company, and Sony went from probably being PlayStation was an incredible machine, but they were still behind Nintendo at that point. Sony became the biggest company in gaming at that point of that generation because they put a DVD player in. It was that simple. That was why I got one. I'm not getting a Dreamcast. I'm going to get one of them because I can play DVDs on it, and I don't have to pay an extra £100 for a DVD player. It was a no-brainer. 7th gen, which comes around mid-2000s, 360, PlayStation 3, and the Wii. The Wii is the critical one there. The Wii was a massive game changer because of how it was played and how it was marketed. Not marketed as a games machine almost at all. Marketed as a family entertainment system. Families played together. I always find my favourite Wii game ever is Manhunt. because you can use the Wii controllers to beat people to death. So I'm not entirely convinced about that family aspect, but yeah. 8th gen, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Wii U and Switch. The key thing with the 8th gen really is the PlayStation 4 wiping the floor with everyone else. I'm not convinced anymore whether Nintendo are going to exist outside of being a handheld machine anymore. I don't think they'll ever do a console ever again. The only reason Microsoft still exists, because I mean they got obliterated by the PS4, is because it's Microsoft and they have money. Really, they should have shut down. The Xbox One sold so poorly compared to the PS4. They shouldn't be in business anymore. And I think that's probably going to be Series X is going to go the same way against the PS5 as well. Evolution, never revolution. The whole thing about console generations, with the 9th gen of consoles now, they evolve. There's never been a revolutionary change in any of this. You start small and it's just incremental changes that have taken us up here. Therefore, if you want to understand where we're at, you have to look backwards. Where did this come from? I guess 9th gen might be finally the one that VR gaming takes off in on the console, but we wait for a little while to find out. But it won't be long to find out. Okay. Is there anything else I need to cover here? There's a few nice images of timelines. Evolution of technology always comes down to two things. Things are improved and refined rather than being plucked out of thin air. Okay? Nothing ever comes out from nowhere. And to take this from a McLuhanist point, you need gaming to exist first of all in order for it to be incrementally improved. The culture needs to be established. And then all changes in gaming come from somewhere. They are attributable to people. We always have to think about why things happen. Why did Sony become a gaming company? Sony, the biggest electronic company in the world. Why did they do it? Why didn't Microsoft do it? The biggest computing company in the world. Why did they get into this market? Somebody answer that question to me. Why?
There was money to be made.
How much money?
Well, considering the success of with these 16-bit systems, why not? I mean, Sony was developing the Walkman, so why not develop a gaming system, right?
I mean, Morgan's right. Okay, it is kind of a why not thing, but the truth of it is, what is the biggest industry in entertainment?
Gaming.
Of course it is. You add up the entire revenues of the cinema industry per year and put them up against gaming, and gaming dwarfs it. Music industry, way, way ahead. Television, not a hope. Gaming is the most lucrative entertainment product anywhere, ever. More revenue per year than anything has ever pulled in. Sony aren't back in a loser in the 90s. They want a slice of a market that they were projecting at the time would be smaller than it is now. Now, Sony have kind of got lucky. They went into this. But what actually they came out with was a far, far bigger market than they ever envisaged would happen. Same with Microsoft. Microsoft might be the little brother in the console generations. The Xbox One made them a shit ton of money. I mean, they got dwarfed by Sony, but hey, Microsoft made money. Don't worry. The Series X is pulling in revenue. So, Game Pass earns Microsoft more than Microsoft Office does. You think about how many machines in the world run Office. Yeah. This is huge. The gaming industry has gone from 71 years ago being played on a cathode ray tube in a laboratory to being the biggest industry of entertainment that's ever existed. And it keeps getting bigger. It is the only one that when the pandemic came along, they were like, oh yeah, time to make some big bucks. Yeah, because everyone's at home. What are they going to do? And that's basically all I did as well. What do we need to take from this morning? Affordances are really important. How you play and what you play on, that is called the affordance model. And that is really critically important in understanding how what form of games are created and how that shapes gaming practice and culture. And if you separate the gamer from the platform and the game, the reason why I've gone through the history of it this morning is you can't. The gamer, the platform, and the game itself are what we call co-constitutive. They are, to use the really important language that we need to start using in the third year, a socio-technical assemblage. Gamer, game, platform, always together. What we play, how we play it, cannot be divorced from what we play it on, and who made that thing, and how they structured it, and how they want us to play it as well. These things are all reflective of one another. And through the generations of consoles and arcade machines and PCs and so on, you see refinements that lead us up to this point. Okay, promise I'll manage time better next week. I will see you all then. Turn it off a second. You all know there's no seminars, right?
Yeah.
Everyone happy with that?